And I hope that you ask some questions. I want this talk to ask more questions than it answers. And so if you have difficulty hearing me, or if I need to slow down, just let me know. So I want to start off with a question, fittingly. And this is not my question. This is actually a question that the famous physicist Enrico Fermi posed to his friends while they were sitting at lunch one day in 1950. Enrico suddenly, sort of out of the blue, asked one question, and this question has sort of shaken science ever since. The question he asked is, where are they? Now, he wasn't talking, of course, about his friends who were eating with him. He was talking about extraterrestrial life. He was talking about aliens. And so this question comes out of a certain context. And the cornerstone of this context is something called the Drake equation, which is this equation right here. And basically, it's an equation to try and figure out how many extraterrestrial intelligences, ETIs, there could be in the galaxy. And so the way that this works is R, let me use a pen here. R is the ratio that stars are formed. And we move down to how many of those stars have planets. How many of those planets could support life, or are similar to Earth, I should say. The next one is how many of those Earth-like planets could support life. And then we move on. How many of those life forms might become intelligent? And then which of those life forms would like to communicate? And what is the lifespan of these civilizations that we're talking about? And of course, the big N is the number of species that we would call extraterrestrial intelligence. Intelligence in a similar way that we talk about it when we describe ourselves. Now, so I think that there's kind of this big question, where are they? I think there's kind of 4 general answers that are possible. Very, very general. And then we'll go ahead and we'll move through those and get to some of the more specific and some of the more strange ideas that are floating around out there. So the 4 answers, where are they? Nowhere. We are the only intelligent life in the universe, or at least our galaxy. Not here. They're somewhere out there, but for one reason or another, they're not here. They are here, and some people, and I'd like to get into some of that. There are theories that we are actually being visited, or have been visited in the past, by extraterrestrial life. And then, of course, the most sinister option, here and hidden. So let's start with number 1. Nowhere. This is also called the uniqueness hypothesis. And basically, these different variables in the Drake equation would have to be extremely small. One of these would have to be or a multitude would have to be extremely small. So let's think about this. I think the first 2 we can kind of eliminate are lifespan and communication. Communication, I think we can eliminate first of all. Let me get my other pen here. I think we can eliminate communication because that was thrown into this as sort of a way to fund SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, that thinks that the aliens are going to have radios that are going to be communicating with us. I think if you have an intelligent life form, it's going to be capable of communication in some sort of way. And lifetime, while lifetime is interesting to think about, do all the idea is, does every civilization destroy itself after a certain point in time? This equation came out of the Cold War, and I think that context really plays into that a lot. And I think that assumes a lot of things about other possible civilizations, that they will be destructive in the same sorts of ways that that Earth creatures have been so far. And so I'm going to go ahead and cross that one out too. So now we're thinking about, you know, rate of stars isn't going to change anytime soon, and there's plenty of stars, as I'm sure you all know. So let's talk about the next couple of variables here. There's the number of planets in each solar system, and then there's the number of planets that are like Earth in that they can support life. We used to believe as a species, and scientists believed that the Earth was very rare, that the chance of another world that could support life was so infinitesimally small that it, you know, that's the reason that we're not being visited. We don't see anything on our telescopes or anything like that. And this was called the rare Earth hypothesis. Every year that this hypothesis is being basically thrown out the window. Just a couple of months ago, we discovered 2 new planets that are surrounding stars that are very close to us that look like they could be very similar to Earth. They're in that sort of zone, the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold, and they, you know, they look like the kind of planet that could have life. And so this rare Earth hypothesis is really very quickly kind of going down the drain as soon as we got a telescope that could actually see if there were planets or not. So as far as number of planets, no, I don't think that's going to kill, make it a nowhere situation. And I also don't think that number of Earth-like planets, the 2 planets that I mentioned were both Earth-like in certain ways. And so now we go to life, the life situation. Things get a little more complicated. I'm going to set this down here. So now we have life and intelligent life. Let's start with life. You know, is life, even at the smallest little microbe, is it such an extremely rare sort of occurrence that we couldn't expect it to really take place anywhere else? Well, there's been experiments done. Miller and Urey were 2 scientists who did a series of experiments where they had a mundane gas, basically a very sort of common gas that you would have found in Earth's atmosphere a long time ago. They shot this gas with electricity and also with ultraviolet light in 2 different experiments. And both of those experiments seemed to produce spontaneously out of the gas amino acids, aldehydes, carboxylic acids, and these basically the building blocks of life, kind of spontaneously bursting out of this gas, like very, you know, no one really saw this coming. As far as the history of life here on Earth goes, scientists are basically in agreement that life started almost as soon as Earth had cooled enough in order to allow it to actually survive. And so, as far as life goes, it would seem that, from what we know, anywhere life can exist, life forms pretty quickly. Let's talk about intelligence. Is intelligence a mammals only club? That's kind of my joke here, because the dinosaurs had about 30 times the amount of time here on Earth that we as human beings have been here. And as we know, they weren't exactly building hospitals or anything like that. A mammal is a... Yeah. And since then, there have been, besides human beings, there have been other mammals, most especially chimpanzees and dolphins, that are capable of some sort of higher intelligence, although not to the point of what we would call a human intelligence. And you know, it's been about 8 billion years since life first started, and it took the very vast majority of that for humans to evolve. So I think that the one sort of the one thing we can say that could be a possibility for not having any life other than ours would be this intelligent issue. And I think that's probably the strongest part of this case. But in a bigger way, in a more philosophical way, there's something called the Copernican assumption of mediocrity. Copernicus, of course, was the first person to say, oh, hey, the Earth actually isn't the center of the universe. We are kind of a small part out here orbiting the sun, which is not even in the center of this galaxy, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is kind of a general philosophical framework that says that we shouldn't assume that we're super special, unfortunately. And by we, I mean the Earth in general. So the Earth isn't that special, I'm sorry to say. You know, it's special to us, but I don't think that we can continue to assume that it's special on a cosmic scale. So, the next possible solution to our issue would be that they're not here. Obviously, the question now is why not? The sun is a young star in the galaxy, and there have been certain estimates about the total time it would take to colonize the galaxy. Scientists have run this through computers and things like this. I don't really understand it exactly, but even assuming that Einstein was right, we can't go over the speed of light, and so we have to kind of move very slowly, at least on a galactic scale. The average age is about 0.5 to 1 billion years. That's a long time, 500 million to 1 billion years. The estimated age of the galaxy, however, is around 100 billion years. I'm trying to write sideways. So, once again, when we ask the question, why are they not here? Why not? So there have been several attempts to kind of settle this. One of them that I already kind of described was, oh, they all killed themselves. But I think that's a little too much of a Cold War mentality. There's another idea that they've built their computer games too well, and they've gone into their hyperspace or their holodeck sort of computer game, and they don't explore the actual, which I think is a little bit too, once again, too hip and kind of current with our time. And thinking about computers and this thing like that in World of Warcraft. But then there are some very interesting ideas that have been put out recently. One of them is that gamma ray bursts are getting much less common as time goes by. Gamma ray bursts are when a black hole shoots out a huge death wave into the galaxy and destroys anything in its path. And so at the beginning of time, there was a lot of these happening, and as time goes on, there's less and less of these gamma ray bursts that are destroying places that could hold life. On the other hand,
time distance, do you mean this in the beginning and at the end? Is this billion
this
here, or?
time, oh, this would be from the beginning of time, and we would be like here, let's say. Yeah, big time. So there were a lot of these gamma ray bursts, and then we're kind of reaching a balancing point where civilizations can now exist for a long enough time to get intelligent life. And after this, we're all going to enter sort of like a Star Trek universe where there's a bunch of intelligent life civilizations flying around and exploring and everything like that. This is all, speculation. So, but I think it's an interesting idea. I want to move on to another one though, called the sustainability solution, and this has to do with certain ideas in ecology, obviously, that have come out and become very important in Earth history at the moment. And so, basically, I have a quote about this one. The authors came up with this, said that the absence of extraterrestrial intelligence observation can be explained by the possibility that exponential or other faster growth is not a sustainable development pattern for intelligent civilizations. So a civilization either has to choose to become sustainable or to expand very rapidly and then collapse because of the loss of resources and the destruction of the worlds on which this civilization would exist. And then there's a very interesting quote that comes up in this article on the sustainability solution that talks about a post-collapse situation. And just as humans persist after a collapse, it is possible that there exists post-collapse extraterrestrial intelligence. I want you to keep that in mind. This is similar to an idea by G.D. Brin, Glenn David Brin, and basically his idea went like something like this. So here we've got the first little planet that holds life. As the civilization expands after it gains spacefaring technology, it's going to keep going and kind of getting bigger and bigger and bigger like this, and taking different stars, different planets as it goes. The civilization, as it moves outward, would have issues here in the center as things like population growth and the depletion of natural resources become an issue. And so inside, things on the outside would be pretty peachy keen, but once you get into the inside, that's when there's things like wars over resources and famines and these sorts of things. And so there would be these sort of like horrible atrocities that would be happening here on the inside. Now, if we stop and consider for a moment whether Earth could be towards the center of a very, very ancient civilization, we might think there could have been something here. It was destroyed in some way, and things were kind of reset. And this is exactly what Brin starts to talk about. And he even goes so far as to ponder a certain date, which was, of course, the fate of the dinosaurs. Yeah. And so what he is kind of postulating here is that if the ecological holocaust of the Cretaceous was a local manifestation of a death spasm of a prior spacefaring race whose overpopulated sphere of settlement spoiled as this shell of civilization passed outward, Earth may be the first nursery world in the vicinity to develop a species with intelligence. And so basically, this asteroid here could have been part of some sort of planetary war caused by very, very ancient civilizations that were on Earth long, long before humans ever arrived on the scene. Further, he writes, the catastrophic conclusion of the age of dinosaurs is not inconsistent with the violent epoch of settlement, a final war perhaps fought with asteroids. And so I think we can tie this in as well to the sustainability solution that we just went over, which has to do with a civilization which expands too fast will collapse, and there may be survivors. So we're officially on the here or here and hidden solution. And so now we're talking about ancient aliens, which of course is sort of a buzzword. They have a show in the United States called Ancient Aliens, and everyone gets a good laugh out of it. But it is a very kind of compelling argument once you start to think about the age of our planet and the fact that we've never been visited, at least that we know of. And so, was there an ancient colony here that existed during the time of the dinosaurs, possibly even using the dinosaurs for some sort of labor force? The dinosaurs also, some scientists think, were warm-blooded. That's a more popular sort of contention now. And when we go back and we talk about could a non-mammal race become intelligent, I think this is interesting to think about, because the dinosaurs were not exactly reptiles like we like to think of them. They were something else entirely. And so I think that there's a possibility this ancient colony could have been something else entirely that was most likely warm-blooded, but could have, for reasons I'll get into later, have a reptilian appearance. In the same way that dolphins look like fish but are mammals, these creatures could have looked like a reptile but still be mammals. And so, the idea posed by one John Rhodes of the Reptoid Research Center is that reptilians actually, these reptilian beings actually come out of the earth and but have been staying there, went into the earth long ago but have been staying there. He thinks that they are descended from dinosaurs. I think it's more likely they are extraterrestrial. They come from another planet, and that they use the dinosaurs as a labor force. So, here at Hidden Part 2, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, and we're going to talk about UFOs, because this is another topic that people like to bring up when they think about are some sort of extraterrestrial life forms here. Do they take the form of UFOs? You know, UFOs are a big thing, and you know, I don't think I think a lot of people don't really take UFOs seriously, but when you start to read about them, you start to realize how many of the cases are from people who previously did not believe in UFOs, people who are considered by all the people around them to be reliable, and also people who don't show any kind of sign of mental illness or anything like this. It also becomes very interesting when we look back into historical records, and we start to look at the Far East, or tales about fairies, dwarves, and also religious experiences, such as the one in Fatima, Portugal, which did, in fact, feature giant balls of light that came from the sky, moved around, and gave people magical sort of experiences, the exact same sort of structure that we see in today's stories. But the first thing we've got to do is realize that UFOs does not mean aliens from another planet. UFOs simply means something in the sky and we don't know what it is. And that could be a lot of different things as we're going to go on. I am indebted in this section to Shedhalle, and I can't take credit for a lot of these following kind of stuff about UFOs, so I just want to, but I want to introduce you to it. In fact, one of the first references in his book, Dimensions, is from Pierre Bourdieu, a French writer from the 16th century, who reported a UFO over Tübingen on December 5th, 1577. And I'm going to read how he described it. About the sun, many dark clouds appeared, such as we are wont to see during great storms. And soon afterward had come from the sun other clouds, all fiery and bloody, and others yellow as saffron. Out of these clouds have come forth reverberations resembling large, tall, and wide hats, and the earth showed itself yellow and bloody, and seemed to be covered with hats, tall and wide, which appeared as various colors, such as red, blue, green, and most of them black. So throughout time, we've got these stories of lights descending from the sky, and beings of one form or another, whether they're fairies or elves in European folklore, or the modern sort of elongated features and the big head and the big eyes sort of UFOs. There's often a paralysis involved in these sorts of encounters, sometimes coming from the ball of fire, sometimes coming from one of the beings on the ground. And most interesting, I think, are the psychic effects. People who, you know, whether they consider this a religious experience or not, or some sort of, you know, extraterrestrial exploration, they come out of these experiences with profound revelations. Often their personalities are completely changed, and once again, a lot of these are people who did not believe in UFOs before, and also wish to stay anonymous. They don't want their name, you know, they don't want their friends thinking they're crazy or something like this. These are people who, but their stories have been told anonymously, and even things such as healings have occurred with some of these encounters. And so, you know, religion, folklore, UFOs, all of these all of these things have a parallel, and I'm going to quote Vallée. They have a parallel for one simple reason. The mechanisms that have generated the various beliefs are identical. Their human context and their effect on humans are constant. The observation of this very deep mechanism is crucial. It has very little to do with the problem of knowing whether UFOs are physical objects or not. Now there's one more final sort of thing that all of these UFO events have in common, and that's absurdity in how they act, in how the beings treat the people. The fact that the beings can often speak in the local tongue or take on an appearance that has some sort of cultural attachment that can be read from the cultural background, but at the same time, the structure of all these stories is the same. For instance, absurdity. Let's talk about absurdity. In one story, the UFO naut, this little guy right here, asked, "What time is it?" to the person that had been contacted. Contactee said, "Oh, it's 2:30. The UFO naut said, "You lie, it is 4 o'clock. And so, is this, Vallée goes on and he says, is this just a crazy, absurd thing? Or is this trying to teach us something about the relativity of time? This sort of thing is also common in religious experiences. In Lourdes, France, in 1858, there was a girl who met the Virgin Mary, quote unquote, and the Virgin Mary told her to do certain things, among other things, to go and eat grass, and things like this. And so you can also, a lot of people talk about the founding of the Mormon Church, just because it's, I think, probably the most recent sort of major religion that's been founded. And the story with Joseph Smith, who had a giant bright light outside of his window, was contacted by beings. They told him about tablets, and then he wrote them down, and now, it's a huge religion in the world with millions of followers. And so these myths seem to have a similar structure that all has to do with these things coming from the sky, these beings and stuff, but they take many forms. So are they extraterrestrial beings? Are they explorers or something, as is often thought? Vallée says no, and I think he has good reasoning. His reasons are there's too many of them. Vallée goes on to estimate. He talks about the amount that are reported every year, and then a survey that said that 1 in 10 people would actually report this rather than just keep it to themselves and not want to tell anyone because they fear that they would be called crazy. And so extrapolating from that data, Vallée says that there's probably about 150,000 UFO sightings a year. They don't follow physical laws, at least that we know of right now in science. And the UFO naut's description is constantly changing. Sometimes they're 15 foot tall. Often they're little short guys that are hairy, or sometimes bald. It's extremely varied. Sometimes they're regular people. And then there's nonsensical objects in the ship, antique clocks and things like this. The experiments that supposedly take place on some abductees are hilarious in a certain way. Vallée says that the UFO nauts should go back to medical school because they obviously don't know what they're doing. And just the absurdity of the whole thing. Yet, this is the same phenomenon that has been captured on radar. Reliable multiple witnesses witnessing the same thing from miles and miles away, and have these profound psychological and psychic effects. To put it bluntly, Vallée says, the extraterrestrial theory, the theory that these are aliens coming from another planet to survey or something like that, is not strange enough to explain the facts. Carl Jung, one of the, Carl Jung, he needs no introduction, wrote about UFOs in 1959 in in a text called Flying Saucers, a modern myth in the making. And he said that the two, here I've got a quote. He says, "We are dealing with an ostensibly physical phenomenon distinguished on one hand by its frequent appearances, and on the other by its strange, unknown, and indeed contradictory nature." He goes on, "If these things are real, and by all human standards it hardly seems possible to doubt any longer, we are left with only two hypotheses. That of the weightlessness on one hand, in other words, the ability to move without the effects of gravity and this sort of thing that would tear ships apart that we know of, on the one hand, and of their psychic nature on the other." Jung was also someone who studied parapsychology. He was interested in ESP, in foresight, and things like this. And so he goes on to describe these processes. And he says that parapsychology, ESP, foresight, etc., and which quantum physics in recent years have begun to sort of approach in certain ways, suggests that psychological and material processes are indelibly linked. Think of like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, that if we are observing something in when we observe quantum material, when we observe atoms and things like this, they change because they're being observed. So reality, Jung says, reality would be grounded on an as yet unknown substrate possessing material and at the same time psychic qualities. And so what better way to describe these sort of absurd weightless spheres that have fallen to Earth since the beginning of time? So I want to briefly go over one more thing and switch gears yet again. I'm sure like I said, I want to ask more questions than I answer. So one more little sheet here. And this is the next step in my research, but I wanted to bring it up for the sake of interesting conversation. There's something I like to call the power paradigm that has to do with human psychology and sociology. And the power paradigm basically states that as people get an increase in power, certain traits become more pronounced. These traits include things like territoriality, love of hierarchy, and this necessity for ritual and ritualistic behavior. All of these exact traits are what neurophysicist Paul MacLean described as being the traits of the R complex, also known as the reptilian complex. In the womb, fetuses, furthermore, human fetuses, furthermore, can appear reptilian in nature, with tails included at a certain stage before advancing. History is also full of these sorts of ideas. Dragons, snake people, these are common sorts of myths in all cultures. European dragons, there's Ones, the Babylonian amphibious person who came out of the water to teach about culture. The seraphs, or flaming serpents of the Old Testament. The Chinese kings were said to be descended from dragons. They claimed to have dragon blood, and this is where their power came from. And the feathered serpent of South America, feathers being an indication that it could fly. And so there's obviously a lot that we still don't know about science and about human psychology and things like this, and these are the questions that I've been left with. If in fact, as it seems, either for some very bizarre reason, extraterrestrials haven't made it here, or they have in the distant past, how does that affect us now? And what kind of contemporary issues can we start to think about when we consider that we all might be reptilian in nature. So I'd like to leave you with that. And my website, if you're interested in keeping up with my research, is www.walkingwithreptilians.com. Thank you very much.
What do you think about all these creatures which Hieronymus Bosch has on his paintings? I mean, they really look like, there are many reptile parts in them, and they really look like they come from science fiction films.
Yeah.
And this was really in the...
Yeah. The history of art is full of strange objects from the sky, once again, and fantastic creatures. And so that's all coming from somewhere. And I think you could argue that it comes from the same place as the modern myth, maybe, of UFOs.
There was also a skeleton found, which I think it was in the US, and a big research about this, where it comes from. And it was a very small human being with a